Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Stellar HFY, your home for the most incredible stories of human resilience and ingenuity across the galaxy. First of all, I need to say thank you, seriously. The engagement on our recent military sci-fi stories has been absolutely phenomenal. Today, we're diving into something special, a story about industrial expertise becoming the ultimate weapon, military traditions being turned against themselves, and why you should never, ever underestimate what a human can do with mining equipment and 20 years of experience blowing up asteroids. So grab your favorite drink and get comfortable. Let's begin. Commander Marcus Thorne drifted through the wreckage of Kepler Station, his mining vessel, Defiant, moving slowly between the twisted remains of what had been humanity's proudest fleet. The debris field stretched for kilometers in every direction, chunks of hull plating spinning slowly in the void alongside dead reactors and the scattered personal effects of 3,000 crew members who would never see home again. Thorne had been a mining engineer for 20 years before the war started, hauling deep-bore charges and extraction equipment between asteroid operations across the outer colonies. Now he found himself in the impossible position of being the last human commander in known space, piloting a ship that was never designed for combat and carrying cargo that was meant to blow up rocks, not wage war against an alien empire. The Defiant was 200 meters of pure industrial utility, all reinforced cargo bays and heavy-duty sensors designed to locate valuable minerals in asteroid fields. She carried no weapons worth mentioning, only shields rated for solar radiation protection and sleeping quarters for a maximum crew of 4. Today that crew consisted of exactly one person, as it had for the past 3 days since Thorne watched the systematic destruction of every other human ship in the system. His computer kept flashing warnings about operating outside normal parameters, alerts he'd learned to ignore when normal parameters died along with 17 ships and their crews. The vessel's artificial intelligence couldn't comprehend that the safe, predictable world of mining operations had ended the moment Emperor Kaveth arrived in the system with his dreadnought and his reputation for never losing a battle. Thorne guided his vessel through the debris field with the methodical precision of a man who'd spent decades analyzing complex three-dimensional structures, cataloging the destruction with the same systematic approach he'd once used to survey asteroid compositions. The flagship Yorktown had been split clean down the middle, her fusion reactors dark and radiating the cold of deep space. The escort destroyers existed now only as scattered particles of metal and ceramic, reduced to their component atoms by whatever weapon had killed them. Each of the 17 destroyed vessels had been bigger, faster, and better armed than his industrial hauler, crewed by professional military personnel with years of training in ship-to-ship combat. None of their advantages had mattered when the shooting started, and every piece of wreckage told the same story of overwhelming technological superiority meeting unprepared resistance. The entity responsible for this destruction called himself Emperor Kaveth, supreme commander of something called the Valthrian Dominion, and Thorne had been forced to watch from the edge of the system as Kaveth's massive dreadnought sovereign's fist systematically dismantled the human fleet with weapons that turned starships into bombs using their own power sources. The enemy vessel was everything the Defiant wasn't. 8 kilometers of armored hull bristling with weapons arrays and fighter bays, crewed by warriors who'd spent their entire lives perfecting the art of conquest. Kaveth himself represented something humanity had never encountered before, an alien leader who'd built his empire on the principle that rulers must prove their worthiness through personal combat, killing enemy commanders with their own hands to demonstrate their right to command. 14 star systems had fallen to this method, and Kaveth's record remained unblemished by a single defeat. The weapon that had destroyed the human fleet was called a quantum lance array, and Thorne had studied its effects on the wreckage using his mining sensors to analyze the distinctive electromagnetic scarring left on the hulls of the dead ships. The lances fired concentrated electromagnetic pulses that destabilized fusion reactors, turning each vessel's power source into an uncontrolled nuclear explosion. The human ships hadn't been shot to pieces in traditional combat. They'd been cooked from the inside out as their own reactors went critical under the influence of precisely tuned energy weapons. From an engineering perspective, Thorne could appreciate the elegance of the system Fusion reactors required exact electromagnetic containment to function safely, and disrupting that containment with the correct frequency pulse transformed every reactor into a fusion bomb. The approach was clean, efficient, and absolutely devastating against any civilization that relied on controlled fusion for power generation, which unfortunately described every human ship, station, and colony in known space. What bothered Thorne more than the weapon's effectiveness was the systematic nature of the attack. Kaveth hadn't simply won the battle, he'd made victory look effortless. The human commanders never had time to adapt their tactics, attempt new strategies, or even organize a fighting retreat. The Emperor had struck with the precision of a surgeon and the overwhelming force of a natural disaster, using humanity's own fusion technology against them in ways their military doctrine had never anticipated. This wasn't the random destruction of a barbarian warlord, but the calculated methodology of a tactical genius who'd perfected his approach across more than a decade of conquest. The realization that Earth faced an enemy who combined superior technology with superior strategy made Thorne's situation feel even more hopeless than the obvious disparity in firepower suggested. Thorne's proximity alarm suddenly shattered the silence of his bridge, announcing the end of his 3-day vigil among the dead with electronic shrieks that seemed obscenely loud in the tomb-like quiet of the debris field. Dominion scout ships materialized from behind the larger chunks of wreckage, their sleek hulls reflecting the distant starlight as they moved to surround his vessel with the coordinated precision of a hunting pack. They'd been waiting for him, positioned among the debris with the patience of predators who knew their prey had nowhere to run. The Defiant was built for hauling massive loads of mining equipment across interstellar distances, her engines powerful enough to move entire industrial operations, but designed for endurance rather than speed. The scout ships were purpose-built for interception, faster and more maneuverable than anything in the human merchant fleet, and even if Thorne somehow broke through their formation and reached the hyperspace jump point, Kaveth's main fleet was already moving to block every possible escape route. As the tactical situation crystallized around him, Thorne found himself studying his cargo manifest with an entirely new perspective, noting that the Defiant carried a complete load of deep-bore mining charges, shaped fusion explosives designed to crack open the densest asteroids and extract valuable minerals from their cores. 20 years of demolition work had taught him everything about controlled explosions, the precise application of force needed to fracture different types of materials, and he'd worked with every variety of spaceborne mineral formation cataloged by human science. Some of those formations, he realized with growing interest, bore a remarkable similarity to the quantum-stabilized alloys he was observing in the Valthron wreckage, exotic materials that his charges had been specifically engineered to penetrate and destabilize through controlled fusion reactions. Emperor Kaveth's voice suddenly filled the bridge through the communication system, carrying the arrogant confidence of a conqueror who'd never experienced defeat and seemed to genuinely enjoy the psychological aspects of warfare as much as its physical destruction. "This is Emperor Kaveth of the Valthran Dominion. You will surrender your vessel immediately, human, and if you comply without resistance, I may grant you the honor of a quick death rather than the prolonged torment your species deserves for its defiance." Thorne activated his transmitter and responded with the calm precision of a man who just realized he was holding a potentially winning hand in what had appeared to be an unwinnable game. "This is Commander Thorne of the mining vessel Defiant. I'm currently engaged in some technical calculations, Emperor, but I'll be happy to discuss terms with you in just a moment." He terminated the transmission and immediately began running blast pattern calculations, the same mathematical analysis he'd performed thousands of times on thousands of different asteroids over 2 decades of mining operations. The only significant difference was that this particular rock happened to be 8 kilometers long, heavily armed and commanded by an alien emperor with a perfect record of conquest, who was about to discover that mining engineers approach problems from angles that military commanders never considered. Emperor Kaveth stood on the command deck of the Sovereign's Fist, his attention focused on the tactical display that showed a single human mining vessel drifting helplessly among the wreckage of what had been a reasonably impressive colonial fleet until 3 days ago. The human commander's casual dismissal of his surrender demand represented an unexpected response. In 14 conquered systems, Kaveth had encountered desperate pleas for mercy, furious declarations of defiance, and occasionally the dignified acceptance of inevitable defeat. But casual disregard was something new. The novelty intrigued him more than it probably should have, given that the outcome of this encounter was as predetermined as sunrise. But Kaveth had learned to appreciate the small variations that kept conquest from becoming tediously repetitive. Fleet Commander Morvac approached across the bridge with the careful deference appropriate when addressing an emperor who'd earned his position through personal combat rather than accident of birth, his posture reflecting the military precision that had made the Dominion's expansion possible. My lord, our detailed scans confirm that the human vessel is exactly what it appears to be. A simple cargo hauler with industrial-grade sensors, minimal defensive systems, and no weapon signatures of any significance. The commander appears to be operating alone, which suggests either remarkable courage or complete insanity. Kaveth acknowledged the report with a slight nod, his mind already focused on the larger strategic picture and the demonstration he would create for the human colonies that were undoubtedly monitoring this encounter through their communication networks. Valtran tradition demanded that their emperors lead from the front lines of conquest, proving their worthiness to rule through direct victory over enemy commanders in personal combat. This cultural requirement had built their empire by creating a leadership class that understood warfare from first-hand experience rather than theoretical study, separating the Dominion from the soft, comfortable civilizations they'd systematically crushed across their expansion through 14 star systems. Every conquest had to carry personal meaning. Every victory had to be earned through the spilling of enemy blood by the Emperor's own hands, and every defeat of resistance had to serve as a psychological weapon against future opposition. Signal all vessels to begin broadcasting across human communication frequencies, Kaveth commanded, his voice carrying the authority of absolute power backed by demonstrated competence in its application. Every human colony needs to witness what happens to those who choose resistance over the mercy of immediate surrender. They need to understand that defiance brings only death, while submission offers the possibility of useful service to the Dominion. He paused in his orders, studying the small ship on his tactical display with the focused attention of a predator examining particularly interesting prey. And prepare the primary interrogation chamber for a guest. I want to look this Commander Thorn directly in the eyes when I demonstrate why 14 star systems have learned to fear the name of Kaveth. The atmosphere on the command deck shifted subtly as Kaveth's officers recognized that this encounter would serve a purpose beyond the simple destruction of a single mining vessel. This would be another chapter in the psychological warfare that made Dominion conquest possible with minimal resistance. When the lesser species of the galaxy witnessed their leaders dying at the hands of Valthran emperors, organized resistance typically crumbled into individual desperation, and desperation was far easier to manage than coordinated military opposition. Fear had proven more effective than firepower in most situations, and Kaveth had spent years perfecting the art of transforming enemy defeats into tools of empire-wide intimidation that prevented future conflicts before they could begin. Aboard the Defiant, Thorn worked with the methodical precision that had made him successful in 20 years of solving complex engineering challenges under dangerous conditions, his mining sensors analyzing the wreckage around him and breaking down the atomic composition of Violthran hull materials using equipment originally designed to identify valuable mineral formations in asteroid fields. What his analysis revealed made him genuinely smile, for the first time since watching his species' fleet die in nuclear fire. The discovery represented the kind of ironic twist that made his engineering background feel like preparation for this exact moment rather than a liability in military combat. Computer, cross-reference these hull composition readings with our complete mining database and provide detailed analysis of material properties, Thorn ordered, feeding the spectroscopic data through systems designed to catalog every type of spaceborne mineral formation encountered by human mining operations across 3 centuries of expansion. The results appeared on his display within seconds, confirming what his experienced eye had already begun to suspect based on the distinctive patterns in the wreckage around him. The Valthrans constructed their warships from quantum-stabilized alloys, the same exotic materials that comprise the densest and most valuable asteroids in known space. Substances that commanded premium prices precisely because they were so difficult to extract and process using conventional methods. These were the same materials that Thorne's deep-bore charges had been specifically engineered to penetrate and destabilize through carefully controlled fusion reactions, explosives designed by human engineers who'd spent decades learning to break apart the most resistant substances in the galaxy. The irony struck him as almost poetic. The Emperor's ships were built from the identical materials he'd been systematically destroying for 2 decades of mining operations, and his cargo hold was filled with the tools needed to continue that destruction on a much larger scale. Thorne initiated what appeared to be surrender negotiations, while his hands operated the cargo control systems, ejecting mining charges in a pattern that would seem like random jettisoning of dangerous materials to any casual observer monitoring his actions. Anyone watching would reasonably assume he was lightening his ship's mass in preparation for capture, discarding industrial explosives that might be interpreted as weapons by his captors. But Thorne was actually positioning the charges with the precision of a master craftsman creating a shape-bore array designed to fracture particularly stubborn mineral formations by applying force from multiple calculated angles simultaneously. The Valthron quantum lance technology was undeniably impressive from a purely technical standpoint, but Thorne had been studying its effects on the destroyed human ships using sensors that could analyze electromagnetic scarring down to the molecular level. The weapon system functioned by generating precisely tuned electromagnetic pulses that destabilized fusion containment fields, transforming controlled power sources into uncontrolled nuclear explosions that destroyed ships from within using their own energy systems. What Emperor Kaveth apparently didn't understand was that mining engineers worked with uncontrolled fusion reactions as a fundamental part of their profession. The controlled creation of fusion instabilities in quantum-stabilized materials was literally the basic method used to fracture solid asteroids and extract valuable resources from formations that resisted conventional mining techniques. Kaveth's voice returned through the communication channel, carrying significantly less amusement and considerably more imperial impatience than his previous transmission had contained. Human Commander, you will cease whatever pathetic delay tactics you're attempting and surrender immediately, or I will provide you with a personal demonstration of why resistance to the Dominion has proven both futile and fatal across 14 conquered star systems. Thorne continued positioning his mining charges while maintaining the pretense of negotiation, buying time to complete his preparations while satisfying his professional curiosity about the weapon system that had destroyed his species' fleet. Emperor, I certainly appreciate the historical context you are providing, but I find myself curious about the technical specifications of your quantum lances from a purely engineering perspective. I've never encountered weapons capable of destabilizing fusion containment with such remarkable efficiency, and I'd be interested in understanding the underlying principles involved. The pause that followed suggested Kaveth was deciding whether to indulge what appeared to be the technical curiosity of a defeated enemy. And when he responded, his voice carried the predatory satisfaction of a hunter who enjoyed explaining his methods to cornered prey. The lance arrays generate electromagnetic resonance, cascades that disrupt the quantum fields, maintaining fusion containment integrity, causing enemy vessels to destroy themselves using their own power generation systems. The elegance lies in turning their technology into the instrument of their destruction. Wouldn't you agree that represents a superior approach to warfare? Absolutely elegant in its conception and execution, Thorne agreed, while watching his tactical display confirm that the shaped charges had reached their optimal positioning around his vessel in a configuration that would be invisible to enemy sensors, but devastating in its potential effects. However, I find myself wondering about a specific technical detail that might interest a fellow engineer. What exactly happens when those electromagnetic resonance cascades encounter fusion reactions that have already been deliberately destabilized using industrial mining techniques? I'm asking purely out of professional curiosity, you understand. The silence that followed this question stretched considerably longer than the previous pause, and when Kaveth finally responded, his tone had shifted from predatory confidence towards something approaching wary suspicion. What precisely are you planning, human? Your question suggests knowledge that a simple mining engineer should not possess. Thorn activated the arming sequence for his mining charges, their familiar harmonic resonance filling the Defiance bridge with the sound of controlled fusion reactions preparing to become very uncontrolled indeed under the guidance of someone who understood exactly how to direct their destructive potential. Nothing particularly complicated from my perspective, Emperor. I'm simply preparing to conduct a small-scale demonstration of industrial mining techniques applied to exotic materials under combat conditions. You see, I've devoted the past 20 years to creating precisely controlled fusion reactions in quantum-stabilized substances, the exact same materials your impressive warships are constructed from. And the fundamental difference between our approaches is that when I destabilize fusion reactions in those materials, I do so deliberately and with considerable expertise gained through decades of practical experience. The communication channel fell completely silent as Emperor Kaveth finally began to comprehend the true nature of the trap that was closing around his dreadnought. His quantum lances were designed to transform controlled fusion into chaotic destruction. But Thorn's mining charges were engineered to harness that chaos and direct it with surgical precision through the most resilient materials known to galactic science. "You're completely insane," Kaveth finally transmitted. But the uncertainty that had crept into his voice marked the first crack in the confidence that had carried him through 14 successful conquests. Thorn watched the Sovereign's fist maneuvering into what the Emperor clearly believed was optimal firing position. Exactly as his calculations had predicted, an experienced military commander would position his vessel for maximum tactical advantage. "No, Emperor, I'm simply exceptionally competent at my chosen profession, and you've made the fundamental tactical error of constructing your warship from materials that I've spent the past 2 decades learning to destroy with increasing efficiency and precision." Thorn's mining sensors had been recording electromagnetic signatures from the quantum lance arrays throughout the battle 3 days earlier. Data that most military analysts would have dismissed as background radiation, but which told a complete story to someone who'd spent 2 decades working with controlled fusion in exotic materials. The lances generated massive electromagnetic pulses in a specific frequency range, pulses designed to disrupt the delicate quantum fields that maintain fusion containment in standard reactor designs. What made Thorne smile as he studied the readings was the realization that those same pulses would have exactly the opposite effect on his mining charges. The charges, which were designed to work with electromagnetic disruption rather than against it. Mining engineers had learned centuries ago that the most efficient way to crack quantum-stabilized asteroids was to destabilize their internal structure using controlled fusion reactions, and the electromagnetic interference that would shut down a ship's reactor would actually amplify the fusion process in his deep bore charges. The fusion bore penetrators in his cargo hold represented 3 centuries of human engineering focused on a single problem: how to break apart materials that weren't supposed to break. Each charge contained a shaped fusion reaction designed to bore through solid rock by creating a sustained nuclear fire that could eat through quantum-stabilized substances like acid through paper. The charges worked by establishing a controlled fusion reaction and then using electromagnetic fields to shape and direct the resulting plasma stream, turning nuclear fire into a precision cutting tool that could slice through asteroid cores with surgical accuracy. The electromagnetic pulses from Kaveth's quantum lances wouldn't disrupt this process. They would remove the control mechanisms and turn his surgical tools into uncontrolled fusion streams that would bore through anything in their path until they exhausted their fuel or encountered something that could absorb their energy. Thorne's 20 years of experience had taught him something that no military engineer would ever learn. Quantum-stabilized materials failed in predictable patterns when subjected to sustained fusion reactions. The exotic alloys that made Valthran's ships nearly indestructible against conventional weapons were actually more vulnerable to fusion penetration than ordinary steel, because their quantum-stabilized structure created cascade failure points that could spread throughout an entire hull if the reaction was initiated at the correct locations. He'd seen it happen in asteroid mining operations when charges were placed incorrectly. The fusion reaction would spread through the quantum matrix like fire through dry paper, turning solid rock into expanding plasma in seconds. The Sovereign's fist was essentially a massive asteroid made of the same materials he'd been learning to destroy his entire professional life, and he was about to demonstrate that knowledge on a scale that would reshape galactic warfare forever. Attention all vessels, human colonies, and Dominion forces. Thorn broadcast on all frequencies, his voice carrying the calm authority of a man who just realized he held the keys to victory in what had appeared to be humanity's final defeat. This is Commander Marcus Thorn of the mining vessel Defiant, and I'm about to provide a technical demonstration that I believe will interest everyone currently monitoring this situation. Emperor Kaveth's quantum lance technology is indeed impressive, but it has a fundamental flaw that becomes apparent when you understand how fusion Bohr mining charges actually function in quantum-stabilized materials. The communication channels erupted with overlapping transmissions as both fleets suddenly realized they were about to witness something unprecedented. Dominion officers demanding explanations, while human colonies desperately recorded every word of what might be their species' final tactical innovation. Thorn continued his broadcast while making final adjustments to his charge array, positioning each explosive with the precision of a master craftsman preparing to demonstrate techniques perfected over decades of practical experience. The Emperor's weapon works by disrupting fusion containment, turning controlled reactions into uncontrolled explosions. However, mining charges are designed to work with uncontrolled fusion, to harness it and direct it through materials that conventional weapons cannot penetrate. When quantum lances fire at fusion Bohr charges, they don't destroy the charges. They amplify them and remove their safety. Limitations. Emperor Kaveth's voice cut through the chaos on the communication channels, carrying a mixture of growing understanding and absolute fury as he realized the trap closing around his seemingly invulnerable dreadnought. You're telling me that my own weapons will make your explosives more dangerous rather than destroying them? That's impossible, human. No species in the galaxy has developed technology that turns defensive measures into offensive advantages. No other species in the galaxy spends their time blowing up rocks for a living, Thorn replied, watching his tactical display as the Sovereign's fist moved into the exact firing position his calculations required. But humans have been mining quantum-stabilized asteroids for 3 centuries, and we've learned that these materials have very predictable failure modes when subjected to sustained fusion reactions. Your ship is built from the same materials I've been destroying professionally for 20 years, and you're about to fire a weapon that will turn my mining charges into fusion streams capable of boring through your hull like it's made of paper. The silence that followed this revelation lasted nearly 30 seconds, broken finally by Fleet Commander Morvac's voice as he addressed his Emperor with barely concealed desperation. My lord, perhaps we should consider withdrawing to a safer distance until we can analyze this threat more thoroughly. The human may be bluffing, but if his claims are accurate, engaging at close range could be catastrophic. Kaveth's response carried the weight of cultural traditions that had built an empire and the personal pride that had never accepted defeat in 14 conquered systems. Withdraw? Retreat from a single human mining vessel? Fleet Commander, you forget yourself. Valthran emperors do not retreat from inferior opponents, regardless of their claims or threats. We have conquered 14 star systems using these methods, and we will conquer the 15th today. He paused, and when he continued, his voice carried the finality of a man choosing death over dishonor. All vessels will maintain position and prepare to witness the destruction of human resistance. I will personally ensure that this Commander Thorn learns why the Dominion has never suffered defeat. Thorn activated his escape pod's preparation sequence while maintaining his broadcast to both fleets, knowing that the next few minutes would determine whether humanity survived as a free species or died as a cautionary tale about the futility of resisting superior force. Emperor, I respect your commitment to tradition, but I should mention that I've programmed my ship's autopilot to maintain optimal distance for the mining charges to achieve maximum penetration of your hull. Whether you fire or not, this demonstration is going to proceed exactly as I've calculated. The communication channels fell silent as both commanders committed themselves to a collision course that would end with one of them dead and the other establishing a new paradigm for interstellar warfare. Kaveth bound by cultural expectations that valued honor above survival, and Thorn driven by the desperate hope that 20 years of blowing up rocks had prepared him to save his species from extinction. Emperor Kaveth fired the quantum lance array with the cold precision of a predator who'd killed 14 civilizations and never doubted the outcome of battle. The massive energy discharge lighting up space between the Sovereign's fist and the Defiant, with electromagnetic fire that should have reduced the human mining vessel to component atoms. Instead, the pulse struck Thorn's carefully positioned charges and transformed them from controlled mining tools into uncontrolled weapons of unprecedented destructive potential. The electromagnetic interference stripping away their safety protocols and turning shaped fusion reactions into streams of nuclear fire that bored through space toward the dreadnought's hull with the focused intensity of miniature stars. The first fusion stream punched through the Sovereign's fist's quantum-stabilized armor like a plasma lance through tissue paper. The exotic alloys that had made Valthran's ships legendary for their durability, proving catastrophically vulnerable to sustained fusion penetration, as the nuclear fire established cascade failure points throughout the hull's quantum matrix. Secondary streams followed milliseconds later, each one creating its own entry point and boring through internal bulkheads, power conduits, and structural supports with unstoppable momentum. The mining charges performing exactly as designed, but on a scale their creators had never imagined possible. The Dreadnought's power grid began failing in cascade as fusion streams severed primary conduits and overloaded backup systems. 8 kilometers of the most advanced warship in Dominion space reduced to a dying hulk by industrial equipment operated by a human who understood the fundamental properties of quantum-stabilized materials better than the aliens who'd built their empire using them. Emergency lighting flickered throughout the Sovereign's fist as her fusion reactors struggled to maintain power through increasingly damaged distribution networks. The ship's death throes beginning with the slow dimming of lights that had never failed in decades of conquest. Thorn watched the destruction through his mining sensors, tracking each fusion stream as it bored deeper into the Dreadnought's hull and created expanding zones of structural failure that spread through the quantum-stabilized armor like cracks in glass. The technical part of his mind marveled at the efficiency of the process. His charges were performing exactly as they would in an asteroid mining operation, creating controlled demolition that would reduce solid material to manageable fragments, except that the asteroid in question was a living warship carrying thousands of crew, members who were about to discover that their supposedly invulnerable vessel was made from materials that humans had spent centuries learning to destroy. Emperor Kaveth's voice cut through the chaos erupting across all communication frequencies, his transmission originating from the Sovereign's fist's command deck, even as fusion fire began breaching the outer hull around him, and structural supports groaned under stresses they were never designed to handle. All vessels will maintain in formation and continue the attack, he commanded, his words carrying the authority of absolute rule even as his ship died around him. The human colonies will be destroyed as planned, and this mining vessel will be eliminated before it can escape to spread knowledge of these tactics to other human forces. Fleet Commander Morvac's response carried barely controlled panic as he watched his Emperor's flagship being consumed by weapons that shouldn't have existed and tactics that defied everything the Dominion understood about space combat. My lord, the Sovereign's fist is suffering catastrophic hull breaches across multiple sections. We need to evacuate you immediately before the fusion cascades reach the command deck. Valthran emperors do not abandon their ships, Kaveth replied, his voice maintaining iron discipline even as emergency alarms began wailing throughout his vessel, and the deck plates beneath his feet started vibrating with harmonic frequencies that indicated imminent structural collapse. I will remain at my post and ensure that our mission is completed, regardless of personal cost. Signal the escort vessels to ram the human ship immediately. Prevent him from escaping with tactical intelligence that could compromise future Dominion operations. Thorn had anticipated this response and programmed his autopilot accordingly, the Defiant maintaining precise distance from the dying Dreadnought while broadcasting technical specifications for his mining charge modifications across all human communication networks, ensuring that every colony would receive the information needed to turn their industrial equipment into weapons capable of destroying Valthran ships. Emperor, Your escort commanders seem hesitant to close with my vessel, probably because they're intelligent enough to realize that ramming a ship surrounded by active fusion charges would vaporize their own vessels along with mine. The truth of this observation became apparent as the Dominion escort ships maintained their positions rather than following their Emperor's suicide orders, their commanders watching in horrified fascination as fusion streams continued boring through the Sovereign's fist's hull and creating expanding zones of destruction that threatened to consume the entire 8-kilometer vessel. Kaveth's final transmission carried the dignity of a warrior who'd built an empire through personal courage and refused to compromise his principles even when facing inevitable death at the hands of an enemy he'd fatally underestimated. "Human engineer," Kaveth said, his voice remaining steady despite the fact that fusion fire was now visible through the command deck's forward viewports. "You have taught me that there are forms of warfare beyond the understanding of traditional military thinking. I acknowledge your victory and your species' right to survive, but I will die as I have lived, on the bridge of my ship, facing my enemies with honor intact." Both vessels were consumed by the expanding fusion reactions within seconds of Kaveth's final words, the Sovereign's fist transforming into a brief new star as her quantum-stabilized hull reached cascade failure and released the energy stored in exotic matter structures that had taken decades to create. Thorne's escape pod ejected automatically at the moment his ship's hull temperature reached critical levels, carrying him away from the mutual destruction he'd engineered while his autopilot continued broadcasting tactical data until the Defiance transmitters were consumed by the same fusion fire that was killing the dreadnought. The explosion that followed was visible from both fleets as a controlled fusion cascade that Thorne had designed to maximize psychological impact while minimizing damage to nearby vessels, a demonstration of human industrial capability applied to warfare that would be recorded and analyzed by military strategists across the galaxy for generations to come. The silence that followed the destruction seemed to stretch for eternity, broken finally by rescue transmissions as Dominion ships moved to recover Thorne's escape pod, their actions driven by military honor codes that required them to preserve the life of an enemy who demonstrated unprecedented tactical innovation. The wreckage of both ships drifted apart slowly, twisted metal and exotic alloys cooling in the vacuum of space, while two fleets tried to comprehend the implications of what they'd witnessed. The death of the most successful emperor in Valthran history at the hands of a human mining engineer who'd turned industrial equipment into a weapon that could destroy ships built from materials considered indestructible by every other species in known space. The Dominion fleet hung motionless in space for nearly 10 minutes after the explosion faded, their formation maintaining perfect discipline while their commanders struggled to process the impossible reality of Emperor Kaveth's death at the hands of a single human mining engineer. Fleet Commander Morvac found himself in command of an Empire's most powerful battle group, staring at debris fields where two ships had been moments before, trying to comprehend how a cargo hauler full of industrial explosives had just rewritten 3 centuries of military doctrine in the span of 30 seconds. The rescue of Thorne's escape pod proceeded with mechanical precision, Dominion Marines following protocols that demanded honorable treatment of enemies who'd demonstrated exceptional courage in battle, but their movements carried the stunned quality of soldiers who'd witnessed something that challenged their fundamental understanding of warfare. Thorne emerged from his escape pod aboard the Dominion flagship Eternal Blade to find himself facing Valthran officers who looked at him with a mixture of professional respect and barely concealed fear, their expressions reflecting the realization that everything they'd believed about human technological capabilities had been catastrophically wrong. "Commander Thorne," Fleet Commander Morvac said, his voice carrying the formal courtesy due a worthy opponent, "you have achieved something unprecedented in Dominion history. No enemy commander has ever killed a Valthran Emperor in single combat, and your tactical innovation represents a paradigm shift that will require complete reevaluation of our strategic planning." The technical data Thorne had broadcast during the battle was already spreading across human communication networks with the speed of electromagnetic radiation, his mining charge modifications being received and analyzed by colonial engineers who understood immediately that they possessed the tools needed to turn every asteroid mining operation in human space into a potential naval base. Within hours of the battle, mining stations throughout the outer colonies were retrofitting their deep-bore charges according to Thorne's specifications, creating weapons capable of destroying Valthran ships using equipment that had been gathering dust in cargo holds and storage facilities. Morvac's strategic analysts presented their preliminary assessment within 6 hours of Kaveth's death, and their conclusions bordered on the apocalyptic from a Dominion perspective. Every human colony with mining operations now possessed weapons capable of penetrating quantum-stabilized armor, turning civilian industrial facilities into military threats that could destroy Dominion vessels with impunity. The Empire's entire fleet architecture, built around the supposed invulnerability of quantum-stabilized hulls, had become obsolete overnight thanks to human engineers who understood exotic materials from an entirely different perspective than military designers. The economic implications were even more devastating than the immediate military threat. Redesigning the Dominion's quantum-stabilized technology would require scrapping hundreds of ships and rebuilding their entire industrial base around materials and techniques that could resist human mining charges. The cost would bankrupt the Empire's economy and leave them vulnerable to other enemies who might exploit their weakness during the Reconstruction period. Assuming such reconstruction was even possible, given that humans had spent 3 centuries perfecting their ability to destroy exactly the materials the Dominion had built their civilization upon. The humans have turned their industrial capacity into a military asset, Morvac explained to his assembled commanders during an emergency conference aboard the Eternal Blade, his words carrying the weight of strategic analysis that had reshaped their understanding of interstellar warfare. Every mining operation, every asteroid extraction facility, every colonial industrial complex is now a potential weapons manufacturing center capable of producing munitions specifically designed to destroy our ships. We're not facing a military enemy, we're facing an entire civilization that has weaponized their jobs. The withdrawal from human space began within 12 hours of the battle. Dominion forces retreating not from fear of human military capabilities, but from the practical recognition that continuing the war would cost more than the Empire could afford to pay. Thorne watched the alien fleet disappear into hyperspace from the observation deck of the Eternal Blade, knowing that he was being returned to human space with full military honors as acknowledgement of his achievement in single combat against Emperor Kaveth. The strategic revolution Thorne had initiated spread beyond the immediate military applications as human colonies began sharing mining technologies and techniques that had previously been trade secrets, creating a collaborative industrial network focused on developing new applications for fusion-bore charges in space combat. Mining engineers found themselves recruited as military advisors, their expertise in destroying exotic materials suddenly more valuable than traditional weapons training, while colonial governments began viewing their industrial facilities as strategic military assets rather than simple economic resources. Other galactic civilizations took note of humanity's transformation from conquered victim to existential threat within a matter of days, recognizing that humans possessed a unique ability to find military applications for civilian technology that other species would never consider. The lesson spread throughout known space with the efficiency of a virus. Humans were the species that weaponized everything, including their industrial equipment, and any civilization that underestimated their adaptability would face the same fate as Emperor Kaveth and his supposedly invincible dreadnought. Thorne's return to Earth was marked not by parades or celebrations, but by the quiet satisfaction of an engineer who'd solved a complex problem using the tools and knowledge he'd spent decades acquiring, his legacy established not through military conquest but through the demonstration that humanity's greatest strategic asset was their deep understanding of how things worked and, more importantly, how they could be made to break. The galaxy had learned that humans didn't just fight wars, they engineered solutions that made continued warfare economically impossible for their enemies, turning every defeat into a learning opportunity and every tool into a potential weapon. The mining vessel. Defiant was gone, destroyed in the fusion fire that had killed Emperor Kaveth, but her sacrifice had established a new reality where human industrial capacity served as the ultimate deterrent against alien conquest, proving that sometimes the most effective weapons were the ones nobody recognized as weapons until it was too late to defend against them. If this story gave you chills about humanity turning mining equipment into galaxy-changing weapons, hit that subscribe button right now for more thrilling HFY stories. Now we want to hear from you. If you were the last human with access to any industrial equipment, what job would give you the deadliest advantage against an alien invasion fleet? Drop your answer in the comments. We read every single one, and your ideas might inspire our next epic HFY tale.